I used to think listening was simple until I realized I was doing it all wrong. I built my leadership voice before I ever built my listening muscles. And I thought that leading meant being articulate, it meant being decisive, and it meant being clear. But I didn't realize how often I was interrupting, redirecting, dismissing, or thinking about my response without even realizing it. The truth is I struggle to listen not just at work, but also at home. And for me, it cost me. This video itself isn't a lecture as much as it's a reflection and a confession about why I struggled so much as a leader to actually listen at work and at home. At the same time, I'm going to talk about the lessons I learned along the way and hopefully impart some leadership wisdom that I've learned through practice over the years. For me, all of this process of listening did get started with a book, but eventually all of this developed and formed after years of practice, listening to my wife, to my kids, to my team, and then really deeply to myself through 4 years of therapy. Here's the hard truth. When you don't listen well, you lead poorly. And when you learn to really hear what's being said, it builds trust, it deepens alignment, and unlocks your leadership potential. So if you're new here, my name is Jared, and I'm a high school teacher turned leadership coach. I help leaders develop themselves and their teams while having enough margin to be present at home. For me, listening is a really critical piece of a lot of my leadership coaching because it is the thing that supercharges leaders' abilities to make a large impact in their team and literally in their personal and home life. For me, one of the biggest things is that I was never taught listening growing up, which I'll get more into later, and nor was I really challenged at work to listen better as long as I was getting the right results. So I'm particularly passionate about this because it is such a win-win across the board, both at work and at home. So before we jump into the whole idea, I think it's important for us to get aligned on what listening is. And I have a working definition that I got from the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the quote says, "When I say empathetic listening, I mean listening with intent to understand. I mean seeking first to understand to really understand." And so, in a nutshell, when I mention listening, I don't just mean reflective listening, which you may have heard of, which is essentially mirroring back what the other person said, nor do I mean the kind of listening that where you basically constantly nod, yep, okay, and you're constantly saying that. I mean, you have a deep intention to try to understand their perspective. There's some more subtleties that I'm not going to get into in this video, but that is what I mean when I say listening. It is seeking to understand the other person's perspective. So the first point for me of why I never learned to listen is that no one taught it for me. In my family of origin, in my cultural heritage as a Mexican American, in my family of origin with my mom, dad, I was never taught how to actually listen. I was never modeled that as well. And then when you get into elementary school here, and I grew up in Southern California, it was not taught in elementary school, middle school, high school, or in college as well. So there was nothing really formal there. And then when I took it to the professional setting, there was not a lot of anything regarding listening. And then I did have a particular angle because of the context that I worked as a high school teacher, where we did emphasize a lot of leadership development points, but listening was never a key topic. Not until I ended up reading a few critical leadership books that started to shape me. I think what's sad about all of that though, right, is that what was rewarded at work was my results, as it should be. But even if there was relational damage along the way, and I saw a lot of leaders rise and grow and, move up the chain of command and promote themselves or get promoted in their careers, regardless of the damage they left behind. And again, I grew up in a professional culture that was very much saying results matter, regardless of the relational damage, as opposed to having a balancing culture of saying we need results, absolutely, but we also need the relationships to be fortified. And I think had I had that blend of the two, then listening would have been treated as essential rather than as a unnecessary or extra thing that they might have. For me, though, all of this began changes again when I started reading The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And there's a quote that says in it, it says, next to physical survival, the greatest need of a human being is psychological survival. To be understood, to be affirmed, to be validated, and to be appreciated. In a nutshell, what the author, Dr. Stephen Covey, is saying is part of being a human is needing to be understood. And how do you be understood? Is you have to be listened to. And so that began a critical shift for me in my journey about this. Is once I read that, I was like, oh my goodness, I don't listen to others myself. At least not really listening and really seeking to understand. So naturally for me, that leads me to point number 2. Listening at home was the hardest. Essentially, I read that in the book, and as I normally do, I read a book and I start practicing it, primarily at home. And that's a whole different conversation altogether. But listening was really hard at home. In marriage, very particularly, anytime my wife shared something with me, I just wanted to solve it. I can say this easily now because I understand what I was going through back then. But me from a number of years ago, whenever something was shared with me, I just wanted to solve it because it was uncomfortable for me to listen to my wife's discomfort and to hear her perspective and to really try to understand. And if I agree with her perspective, then what ends up happening for me is, well, maybe she is right and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I did do that incorrectly, or maybe someone is wronging her and I can't do anything about it. So it almost forced me to deal with a sense of powerlessness and my own internal struggles with that. It was hard. And then when it came to my kids at home, when they were more little, it's easy. You're just like, I know what you need. You need this. That's the bottom line. As opposed to really trying to understand from their perspective what they need. Even recently, as my kids are getting older and they want to do certain things at certain times, like watch TV past a certain point, for me, I'm like, this is the easy bottom line. No, you can't do that. It's not good for you. Rather than taking the time to understand where they're at and seeking to understand their perspective. Now, I'm not saying that you can listen at every moment at all times and it is constantly happening, but it was so difficult to practice listening at home for me because it required me to change the pace of my life and to understand that it wasn't just about solving problems. It was about letting the other person be heard and understood. Fundamentally, where again, when I started this journey at home, it forced me to start to pay attention to all the internal things going on, the quiet longings that I had, the fears, the regrets, the lack of power or control that I had in a given situation. I'd rather just speak over it, ignore that stuff, and not listen to myself. And at the end of the day, listening at home requires a certain level of vulnerability that I can't hide from. And it's extremely hard. So again, listening was really, really hard to do at home. Going back to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, there's this quote that I think emphasizes the push that I had for listening, which it says, or the quote says, empathetic listening is, in and of itself, a tremendous deposit in the emotional bank account. It's deeply therapeutic and healing because it gives a person psychological air. Essentially, what this is saying is, it's saying that listening lets a person psychologically breathe. And that was the thing to say, wait a second, if I am not doing this, then I'm not giving the people that matter most to me an opportunity for psychological air. And I don't want to do that. So even though it was hard, I kept pushing forward and pressing into this difficult thing at home because I wanted to make sure that I was healthily depositing into those relationships. All of that from home leads me to my third point, which is about work. Listening at work felt inefficient, but it was essential. here's the key thing, right? When I was a high school teacher, when I was a leadership coach, practicing all these things, for me, it's like I always felt like I had the answer and I was always busy. So listening felt optional. I knew what they needed to do. I knew how they needed to do it. I knew the quickest way for them to do it. I was extremely busy, so I didn't have time to listen what they were thinking or their thoughts. Instead, I just needed to get it done because I had the right answer. The problem though, right, at least from a relational standpoint, is that skipping that act of listening and trying to understand their perspective, their insight, it cost me, and not only did it impact our relationship, but it cost us, like the person I was working with or the team of us, it cost me understanding their insight, building relational trust, and ultimately building collaboration. See, because a team is greater together than they are individuals if you have a cohesive team. Yet, I was thinking and operating as if I could drive so much results. And again, I'm not only saying that as if I was dysfunctional, that was kind of the structure in which my professional environment was, but that's how we all operated. And if there's anything I've learned, right, is that even if it's structurally off, I can still take personal responsibility for my actions. And so that's when I began to make a shift. I learned in that process, and this is kind of a hard thing to still embrace, is that true leadership isn't about control, it's about having influence. So when I would skip listening, I was essentially trying to exert my control and lose relational influence. But good leadership, true leadership, isn't about exerting my control. The quote that I want to share comes from a book by Brené Brown, and it's called Dare to Lead. And she says, a brave leader is someone who says, I see you, I hear you, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to keep listening and asking questions. When it came to work, there's a certain level of bravery that's needed when we listen. And it requires you sometimes to have the answers and to be quiet, or to not have the answers and be okay with not knowing, but saying, I want to have, even if I have my own answers, I want to have a better answer together. I want to get your perspective and your insight. And again, I'm not saying that at the end of the day, every moment is an opportunity to listen, because fundamentally there are situations in which that's just not going to happen. And that's okay. But it's the general environment, it's the general culture and ethos that you operate in that is really critical to say, I try often and generally and consistently to listen. I think one of the examples that really crystallized the need to listen was the fact that I was working with a client and she was a general manager at her job. So she had moved up, she had done a really good job, and she was struggling at the next kind of leadership point with her and her team, trying to make sure that she sells the upper management of a particular thing, but at the same time, bringing her team into the whole process. From an outsider, so often as a coach, it's easy to look at the situation and assess and kind of see where it needs to go. But this is at the point where I had been practicing listening for some time. I slowed down and really gave her a sense of what she was hearing or what she was feeling. And I mirrored that. I really tried to understand her perspective. And where I left it was just sitting there, not having all the answers, although in my head I thought I did, but I had quieted that voice. And I was like, this is what I'm hearing you say. I'm hearing this, I'm hearing this, I'm hearing this, I'm feeling this tension. We were going back and forth. And as it was beautiful, as that was all happening, you can see her like breathing in a sigh of relief. And then at the same time, light bulbs started going off. Her ideas came in and she started proposing the very things that I would have suggested had I not listened. And she started proposing those. Then I was able to help refine those ideas, contribute my own thoughts as well. And we together, right, came up with a better like solution for that. But what's difficult is so often when I don't listen at work, right, I don't give space for others to both feel heard and seen, while at the same time contributing their own ideas. And then bringing those ideas together to create something that is greater than if it was just my idea or their idea. But it's like the leadership principle called the sum is greater than the individual parts. So putting all the ideas together is greater than just one person themselves coming up with everything. But in all of this, I think my fourth point that I'm trying to get to, right, in terms of home, in terms of work, the other reason why it was just hard to do it at work and at home is that listening requires painful growth. Listening is going to force you to face yourself. It's not just going to be a whole thing where you're going to listen and all of a sudden everything's going to go away. It requires you to deal with all the inner things going on, the discomfort of not being able to solve it. And then if you're ever going to grow past that, you're going to have to get deeper and more curious about why can't you sit with that level of discomfort? Why is it so uncomfortable? I think it's going to be easier to do at work than it is going to be to do it at home, mainly because it feels sometimes that the stakes are higher at home. But at the same time, there is just going to be a tension of all this. When you start to listen, you're going to lose the illusion of control. And I remember rumbling with that. Even recently, when I had to engage in a difficult marital conversation that was just not going well. And it required me to just listen. And internally, there was so many defenses and so many things going on, but I had to pause and deal with it. And let me clarify, I'm not saying I get this right all the time. In fact, it would be amazing if I get this right 50% of the time, right? Because sometimes I listen to those voices. But the point is that with enough practice and time, I've fought to get to this 50% of the time, but I started to be like, all right, well, I get it 1 out of 10 times. Okay, now I've gotten it 2 out of 10 times. And you just keep building upon this, where eventually there's a compounding effect in the relationships that the other person will say, I trust that you'll listen and I want to listen to you. At work, right? And I guess even at home, right? You gain maturity, depth, and like I just said, trust. It's huge, but it's hard. So none of this is going to come easily. And since none of this is going to come easily, I think what will end up happening, there won't be one singular moment that your leadership will dramatically shift. It will be a series of little moments compounding and building upon themselves over time, where you practice this skill and constantly get better at it, fail at it, forget about it, and then keep going. During my 4 years of therapy, diving deep into the inner world of what makes me me and all of that soul work, there was a lot of listening. And the only thing I could say, if you guys choose to go down this deeper rabbit hole of the internal world, which I highly recommend, it will be painful, but there is no singular moment where all of a sudden you listen and everything gets clear. But there are moments when, as you are doing this kind of deeper work and even practicing it at work or at home, little shifts begin to happen. You'll start to realize certain things that are going on internally. And eventually, you'll start healing through those things, and it just gets easier. I do tell you at the end of it, or I do want to tell you at the end of it, it gets easier. And with time, it just becomes a practice and kind of a norm that this is what we do. Just like I wake up in the morning and I use the restroom, I check my phone real quick, I do whatever you do every morning, right? I eat some breakfast. I also listen. That's kind of becomes my norm. Point number 5 is listening is a superpower, but it starts small, right? You build trust one moment at a time, and listening is not going to change everything right away. It's essentially an intentional practice that you have to do it regularly and try it and fail and then pick it up again. Again, I think it's critical to remember, especially on a leadership perspective, because sometimes you think, well, if I'm listening to them, then I'm agreeing with them, right? No, you don't have to agree with them in order to validate what they are saying and to make sure they feel heard. You don't have to come to the same conclusion. Again, maritally, I don't come to the same conclusions at times when I'm listening to my wife. I still disagree with her, but I'm trying to understand it from her perspective. And then I don't want to get into another video, but there's a whole thing about communicating so that my perspective can be understood. I will say this though, leaders who listen at work and at home, they will transform their culture. They will insert massive deposits into their emotional and relational bank accounts with their team and with those that matter most at home, and they will positively transform culture. And that's what I really hope to say in all of that is listening is critical and essential, and it's something that ought to be practiced. If you found all of this interesting and you want to dive a little bit deeper into listening, I created a one-page guide that includes a listening audit where you kind of check in on yourself, a daily practice prompt, and a team culture activity that you can get started on by just clicking the link in the description below. So grab it if you want to kind of dive deeper into that. So putting all of this together in our video, for me, I wasn't taught to listen, and very likely neither were you. That's not necessarily your fault. But not learning it and taking time to practice listening is your responsibility. Listening, I went over the fact that listening is painful, it's slow, it's uncomfortable, but it's completely transformational for your family, for your team, and for you as a leader. So this is a 3-part video series. The first video that I'm putting right over here is called Stop Leading with Your Voice and Start Leading with Your Ears. It's all about why leaders need to listen. And if you haven't seen it, you can check it out right over here. If you have seen this video already, then I recommend you check out this video right over here where I talk about how I became a better listener as a leader in 4 practical steps. In this video, I go over some really practical ways for you to start to listen today. And if it's not on the screen yet and this is blank, then that's because it hasn't come out yet. So be sure to get subscribed to see it when it comes out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in one of these videos.